Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It started on a Friday evening when nerves had already taken root in my stomach. I hadn't been on a proper date in years. Married life had numbed that part of me, dulled it into a predictable rhythm of small arguments, bills, and nights where silence filled the space between us. My wife and I were still together, but the intimacy, the tenderness, had vanished so long ago that sometimes it felt like we were little more than business partners sharing a house. I hadn't told her where I was going that night. She thought I was meeting colleagues for dinner, which wasn't entirely a lie. My colleagues had invited me, but I had turned it down for something else, something reckless. A woman I met online had suggested dinner, and I wasn't sure if I was desperate, curious, or just searching for a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. All I knew was that I wanted to look like someone who deserved to be wanted. That's when I called her. She arrived at my house with a small black case, the kind makeup artists always carried, filled with powders, brushes, and colors I barely understood. She introduced herself simply, her voice soft, almost melodic, as she set her case down on the dining table. She was younger than me, but not by much, with sharp eyes that seemed to see far more than what rested on the surface. "I just want to look decent," I said nervously, half joking. Half dash pleading dot, she smiled as if she had heard the same thing 1,000 times. But when her eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something else. She didn't treat me like just another client. She studied my face with an intensity that made me shift in my chair, as if she were peeling back layers I hadn't even known I had. When she touched my skin with her brush, I felt the jolt of it not just the texture of bristles, but the deliberate gentleness in her hand. Her fingers steadied my jaw as she leaned closer, the faint scent of her perfume enveloping me. She was close enough that I could see the small freckles near her temple, the faint curve of a scar above her lip. Details that had no business holding me the way they did. "This isn't really about your date, is it?" she said quietly, not looking at me as she brushed something over my cheekbone. I froze. My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're looking for something else, not just to impress someone. You want to feel seen." Her words pierced deeper than I expected, and I hated how much they rang true. My wife hadn't really looked at me in years, not with the kind of attention the stranger gave me in mere minutes. The session went on, but my eyes kept betraying me. I couldn't stop watching how her lashes curled slightly at the ends, how her concentration deepened when she dabbed color along my skin. Every small brush stroke lingered too long. Every accidental graze of her fingers felt intentional, even if it wasn't. And every time she leaned back to study her work, she wasn't just assessing makeup, she was reading me, and I felt exposed in a way I hadn't felt in years. When she finished, she handed me a small mirror. I hardly recognized myself. My features were sharper, my face brighter, but what unsettled me most was the reflection of her standing behind me, her gaze fixed not on her work, but on me. "You look good," she said softly, but her tone wasn't professional. It was personal. The air between us thickened. Neither of us moved. I set the mirror down, turning to her slowly, and for a moment, the world outside that room disappeared. I wasn't thinking about the woman I was supposed to meet or the wife waiting unknowingly at home. I was thinking only about the way this woman's eyes lingered on mine, the way her lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. She packed her brushes back into the black case, but slower than before, as if she didn't want the moment to end either. Finally, she closed it and rested her hand on the lid. "You should go," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. I should have stood up, thanked her, and walked out the door toward the date I had planned. But I didn't. I stayed. "Do you want me to?" I asked, my voice low. Her eyes flickered, betraying conflict, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, the space between us collapsing in an instant. Her hand brushed my arm, tentative at first, then firmer, and before I could think of consequences, of vows, of the ring on my finger, I leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, almost a test, but when she didn't pull away, when she leaned, aimed to me with the same hunger I'd been holding back, it deepened into something neither of us could undo. Hours later, I didn't go on that first date. I didn't meet the woman who had invited me to dinner. Instead, I sat in my car outside the hotel where I was supposed to meet her, staring at the wheel, my lips still tingling, my heart pounding with a guilt I couldn't shake, but also didn't regret. When I finally drove home, the house was quiet. My wife was asleep on the couch, the TV still flickering faintly. I stood in the doorway looking at her and wondered how I'd gotten here, how a simple request for makeup had unraveled a thread inside me that I could never pull back together. It wasn't about the makeup. It wasn't even about the date. It was about the way she looked at me, like I was more than the failures, the routines, the indifference I'd been buried in. She looked at me like no one else did, and in that look, I found something dangerous, something intoxicating, something I knew I'd go searching for again. The days that followed should have brought me clarity, but instead they brought only restlessness. I replayed that night over and over again in my head, the way her eyes held mine, the way her hand lingered too long on my arm, the way the kiss had felt both forbidden and inevitable. I thought I could box it away, convince myself it was a moment of weakness, but every time I caught my reflection, I didn't just see myself. I saw the way she'd looked at me, and it wouldn't leave me alone. I deleted the woman's number, the one I was supposed to go on a date with. I never responded to her message asking where I'd gone. It didn't matter anymore. The only message I wanted was from the woman who had come into my house with a case of brushes and left me feeling more alive than I had in years. It took me 3 days before I found the courage to call her. My fingers hovered over the phone, my chest tight with guilt and anticipation. When she finally answered, her voice was steady, but I could tell she already knew what I was calling. I shouldn't have let it happen, she said before I could say a word that wasn't professional. I don't care about professional, I admitted, my voice cracking more than I wanted it to. I haven't stopped thinking about you. I don't even know why it's this strong, but it is. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought she was going to hang up. Then she said quietly, "Me too." That was all it took. The next week I invented a reason to see her again. I told my wife I had a late meeting, but instead I met her at a quiet cafe tucked away from the main street. She wore a simple dress. Nothing elaborate, but when she walked in, every conversation in that cafe seemed to fade into the background. She sat across from me, and for a while we just looked at each other, the tension building so thick it was almost unbearable. We tried to talk casually at first about her work, about my job, about meaningless things that filled the space. Our words kept circling back to the one truth neither of us could avoid. There was something between us we couldn't explain and definitely couldn't ignore. When we left the cafe, I should have gone to my car and driven home. Instead, I followed her when she suggested a walk. The night was cool, the streetlights soft, and we walked close enough that our hands brushed occasionally. Every accidental touch set off sparks that made it impossible to think about anything else. Finally, at the corner of a quiet street, I stopped her. "This feels insane," I said, my voice unsteady. "But I can't stop." She didn't answer with words. She reached for my face and kissed me with the kind of hunger that had been building since the night in my dining room. I kissed her back with everything I had been holding in for years, the frustration, the loneliness, the longing to feel seen. That night, I didn't go home until it was late. I crept inside quietly, my wife asleep upstairs, the guilt wrapping itself around me like a second skin. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the life I had built and wondering how something so steady, so predictable, could feel so empty. The days turned into weeks, and she and I found excuses to see each other again and again. Sometimes it was as simple as me booking her for practice sessions, though there was never much makeup applied. Other times it was late-night drives, stolen moments in parking lots, or afternoons spent in rented rooms where no one knew our names. With her, I felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. She listened when I spoke, really listened, her eyes, never drifting to a phone or a clock. She touched me like I was something worth holding on to, not just a body lying next to hers out of habit. But the more I fell into it, the heavier the guilt grew. At home, my wife began to notice changes. She'd ask why I was smiling at nothing, why I came home late, why I seemed distracted. I made excuses, deflected, laughed it off, but every question chipped away at me. I didn't know if I wanted to confess, to end my marriage, or to keep balancing this dangerous line between two lives. One evening, I came home to find her waiting in the kitchen, her arms crossed, her face set. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked bluntly. The air left my lungs. My first instinct was to deny it, but the weight of her eyes made lying harder than it had ever been. "No," I said, the words sharp and quick, but my voice lacked conviction. She studied me for a long time, then turned away. "You're not here anymore," she said softly, "even when you're standing right in front of me." Her words haunted me. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, torn apart by two truths. I didn't love her the way I used to, but I wasn't ready to destroy the life we had built. And yet, with every secret meeting, with every kiss stolen in the shadows, I was already unraveling it. I told myself I could stop, that it had been a mistake, a distraction, something I could walk away from if I chose to. But then she would text me, or I'd remember the way her eyes lingered on mine, and all my promises would crumble. Because the truth was simple. Even if it was damning, I had found something in her I thought I'd never feel again. And once you've tasted that kind of fire, it's impossible to go back to the cold. The secret meetings didn't slow down, they grew more reckless, more desperate, like a fire spreading through dry grass. Every time I told myself it would be the last, that I would walk away before it consumed me, I found myself back in her presence, caught in the gravity of her smile, her laugh, the way she made me feel seen in ways I hadn't in years. We found excuses that became patterns. I'd tell my wife I was working late, but instead I'd meet her in a hotel, on the outskirts of town where the walls didn't know our names and the sheets didn't smell of guilt. I would walk into those rooms exhausted, weighed down by responsibility. But the moment she put her hands on me, the heaviness lifted. She breathed life back into me in ways that made me question everything I thought I wanted. But the danger of it all began to creep into the edges of our world. She would glance nervously out the window when we met. She'd ask if anyone had noticed me sneaking away. I'd tell her no, but the truth was, people notice more than you think. My wife had grown sharper, quieter, more suspicious. She asked fewer questions, which was somehow worse, because it meant she was no longer seeking reassurance. She was watching, collecting, waiting. One night after another long evening together, I came home smelling faintly of her perfume, a detail I had been too careless to notice. My wife's eyes lingered on me as I set my keys down. She didn't ask me where I'd been. She didn't accuse me. She just stared, and the silence in that room was louder than any scream could have been. I kissed her on the forehead, but she didn't close her eyes the way she used to. She kept them open, watching me, and in that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own house. The next morning, she left a note on the counter. No accusations, no anger, just a line that said, "Do you still love me?" I folded the note and put it in my pocket, unable to answer. When I saw her again, the woman who had been hired only to do my makeup and ended up rewriting my life, I told her about the note. She listened quietly, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. After a long silence, she looked at me and asked, "Do you?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to cling to the life I'd built, the family I promised to protect. But the truth sat heavy on my tongue, and I couldn't force it out. Instead, I whispered, "I don't know." She leaned back, her face unreadable. "Then what are we doing?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that when I was with her, the noise in my head quieted, the weight in my chest lifted. But when I left her, that same weight doubled, pressing harder with every lie I told. Blurred into months. We kept meeting, unable to stay away from each other, each encounter more intense because we both knew it couldn't last forever. The danger of being caught was always there, but so was the hunger, and it was stronger than either of us could fight. We weren't careful anymore. She called me late at night, her voice soft and needy. I lingered too long leaving her apartment once, and I swear I saw someone across the street staring. Then one evening, it all began to unravel. I came home to find my wife sitting at the table with her phone in her hand. She didn't speak when I walked in, just turned the screen toward me. It was a picture of me and her taken at the hotel parking lot. Blurry, grainy, but clear enough I froze. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Who is she? My wife asked, her voice flat, almost. Too calm. I couldn't answer. Every excuse, every lie dissolved in my throat. The silence stretched until she laughed bitterly and shook her head. I knew. I've known for weeks. I just wanted to see if you'd finally tell me the truth. The guilt hit me harder than any accusation could. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just stood up, walked past me, and went upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a suitcase zipper. I followed her, begging, stumbling over apologies, trying to explain feelings I didn't even fully understand. But she didn't look at me. She packed silently, methodically, like she had been preparing for this moment long before I realized it was coming. When she left that night, I stood in the doorway watching her car disappear down the street, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The woman, the one who had been my escape, my solace, held me when I broke down in her arms the next day. But there was no joy in it anymore. What once had been thrilling, intoxicating, had now turned into something heavier. She whispered, "We didn't mean to destroy anything. We just couldn't help it." And I knew she was right. We hadn't set out to ruin lives. But sometimes, one moment of connection is enough to burn everything else to the ground. I lived in the ashes of that choice for a long time. The days after my wife left were hollow, like I was walking through rooms stripped of air. I would wake up in the middle of the night, roll over, and my hand would land on an empty pillow. The silence of the house pressed on me harder than any words she could have thrown. Every photo frame, every corner of the kitchen felt like evidence of a life I had broken with my own hands, but I didn't face that silence alone for long. The makeup artist, her name was Claire, stepped into that void like she had always belonged. There, she brought over takeout when she knew I hadn't eaten, cleaned up dishes I hadn't touched, stayed with me through nights when my thoughts chewed holes in my chest. She kissed me not with the fire we once shared in stolen moments, but with something softer, steadier, like she was trying to stitch the pieces of me back together. For a while, I let myself believe it was fate, that maybe my marriage was already crumbling long before she entered the picture, and all she had done was awaken something I had been too afraid to admit. I wanted to believe that narrative because it was easier than facing the fact that I betrayed someone who trusted me, Claire, and I tried to build something real. We went out openly, no longer hiding in dim hotel rooms or watching shadows outside windows. At first, it was liberating. The weight of secrecy finally lifted, but freedom came with a strange new pressure. Friends looked at us differently, some with pity, some with judgment. Family gatherings became awkward silences, whispers behind my back. Even when we held hands, there was always the unspoken question, were we holding on to each other because we truly belonged together, or because the wreckage we'd left behind forced us closer? My ex-wife, now refused to see me. Divorce papers arrived in the mail with a note from her lawyer, everything clinical, clean, as if our years together had been reduced to signatures and stamps. I signed them with shaking hands. That night, Claire wrapped her arms around me, whispering that we'd get through it, but the truth was, part of me felt like I'd signed away more than a marriage. I'd signed away an entire version of myself. Months passed and routine found us again. I moved into a new apartment, and Claire helped me unpack boxes, filling the walls with color, laughter, and new memories. We cooked dinners, curled up on the couch, planned trips we never would have dared when we were sneaking around. She became my anchor, my light. But there were cracks, tiny ones that deepened with time. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would catch me staring into space, and she'd ask, "Are you thinking about her?" I would deny it, but the truth was, yes, I thought about her often. Not because I wanted her back, but because guilt has a way of chaining itself to your ribs. It wasn't longing, it was regret, and regret is harder to explain. Claire grew restless with my silence. "You still love her, don't you?" she asked one night, her voice breaking. I tried to explain that it wasn't love I felt, it was loss, and loss has its own gravity. She didn't always believe me. Still, she stayed. Through the doubts, through the scars we both carried, she chose to stay. And in saying, she challenged me to stop hiding behind excuses. One night, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, I finally said, "I love you." The words felt raw, terrifying, but real. She looked at me for a long time, tears brimming in her eyes, before whispering, "Then don't ever make me feel like I'm second again." I promised her I wouldn't. Years later, I sometimes look back and wonder if everything had to happen the way it did. If I had been stronger, braver, maybe I would have ended things cleanly before they ever began with her. Maybe I could have spared my ex-wife the betrayal, the pain. But life rarely gives us neat choices. Sometimes we stumble into mistakes that carve paths we never expected. And all we can do is walk them to the end. Claire and I built a life from the ashes, imperfect, messy, but ours. She'd once come into my life just to paint my face for a date with someone else, but instead she became the person who taught me how to face myself. And even now, when I think of the fire and the room we left behind, I know that what survived was something real, something worth holding on to, even if it came at a cost I'll never forget.